Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'll bring you a guide on Yae Miko. We'll talk about her talents, her playstyle, constellations, artifacts, weapons, and themes. Also at the end of the video, I'll give you a showcase on Yae Miko, so be sure to check it out later in the video. Now let's talk about her talents. Her normal attack sequence is what you typically see in a Catalyst user, but what's interesting is her charge attack. Her charge attack triggers 7 thunderbolts that strike in straight line, and each of these thunderbolts has the same damage multiplier of her talent level. So as you might have guessed, yes, her charge attack can deal damage multiple times if the enemy is large enough. Here's an example of her charge attack on Cryo Registine. As you can see, her charge attack strikes twice, even though visually all 7 of them hit the Cryo Registine. I'm assuming this is because of the hitbox of the thunderbolts, where one hitbox of the thunderbolt cannot overlap with each other in order to deal damage. This is a really interesting mechanic, knowing that you can deal twice the damage of your charge attack in a single cast. Next, we'll talk about her E skill, the Yakan invocation C0 Sakura. Her elemental skill summons a turret, or C0 Sakura as they call it, that casts a thunderbolt periodically to one nearby enemy. During the 14 seconds duration, it casts 5 thunderbolts each, so the interval of each thunderbolt is around 2.7ish. The damage multiplier scales depending on the number of the Fox turrets on the field. Starting from level 1, if there are currently 2 turrets on the field, then the level of each turret on the field will increase to 2, so does the damage for each turret, and so on. So when casting her elemental skill, you might always want to cast as many as you can, typically 3 of them at the same time, since the cooldown is only 4 seconds each charge, to maximize the damage output of each turret. Something important to note here is that you cannot summon 2 C0 Sakura too close beside each other, because doing so will destroy the previous one and let the new one take its place, so positioning where to cast your elemental skill is also important. Next is her elemental burst. This elemental burst deals a huge chunk of damage to the enemy even at the initial hit, but you can increase the damage output even further if you have the Fox turrets when you cast her elemental burst. Each turret on the field will be transformed into lightning strikes that deal 600% damage at level 10, totaling to 1800% of damage if you have 3 turrets on the field. Note that Yae's burst is really costly. It costs 90 energy, so you might need a battery in your team to help Yae recharge her energy, and you might also want to get some energy recharge stats in your artifacts. Yae is more of a sub DPS than a DPS, so her playstyle is more of a quick swap where you let your main DPS do their job, and then switch to Yae to cast her elemental skill 3 times, then her elemental burst, then switch Yae back out. Her first passive enables you to reset the cooldown of her elemental skill if the turrets are destroyed by her elemental burst. So you can go cast 3 elemental skills, cast her elemental burst, then recast her elemental skills again 3 times. Her second passive boosts the damage of her elemental skill by 0.15 for each elemental mastery that Yae has. Now let's talk about constellations. Her C1 lets Yae to recharge her energy faster after casting her elemental burst. After casting her elemental burst, each thunderbolt will grant Yae 8 elemental energy, totaling to 24 energy for 3 strikes. Considering the amount of energy that Yae requires to cast her elemental burst, which is 90, this constellation really helps Yae to recharge her burst faster. This is a really great constellation if you have an energy problem. Her C2 is also really great because it sets the initial level of the turrets to be at 2 instead of 1, thus casting her elemental skill 3 times gives you 3 level 4 turrets instead of level 3. The damage difference between level 3 and level 4 is 40%, but since you will cast this 15 times, the damage difference will be around 600%, which is really insane. Her C3 and C5 is just leveling up her elemental skill and elemental burst. Her C4 buffs the electro damage of your team by 20%, but this only benefits electro characters in your party. Overall, this constellation is just okay. Her C6 ignores 60% of the enemy's defense on her elemental skill. For me, it's kinda underwhelming. It doesn't buff the overall damage of Yae, which is a burst character, but only her elemental skill. So if you want to get Yae's constellation, C3 is a great place to stop. Unless you're a whale, then you can go all the way to C6. Now let's talk about her weapon options. Her best in slot weapon without a doubt is Kagura's Verity. It has critical damage as its substat, and its passive boosts the elemental skill damage by 12% each stack, max 3 stacks, lasting for 16 seconds each, and possessing 3 stacks gives you a 12% elemental damage bonus. Yae without a doubt can easily fully utilize the passive effect of the weapon since her elemental skill only has a 4 seconds cooldown and the turrets have a lifetime of 14 seconds, while each stack of Kagura's Verity lasts 16 seconds. Her next best in slot weapon is the Solar Pearl, where it increases the elemental skill and elemental burst damage by 20%, assuming you hit the enemy with your normal attack first at least once. It also has a crit rate substat, so you can focus on finding more crit damage for Yae Miko. One thing to note here is that Yae Miko's skill does a snapshot. So if you do one normal attack, cast her elemental skill 3 times, then her elemental burst, you might still get the full benefit of Solar Pearl, since the buff lasts for 6 seconds, but expect the damage output of the turrets to drop once Yae leaves the field. With Sith is also a good option for her, but the downside here is that the buff is only active once every 30 seconds. If you're playing in the overworld, this might not be that much of a problem, but in the Abyss, especially higher floors such as floor 12, a downtime of 30 seconds can really hurt your overall performance unless you can get a perfect rotation. Mapamari is also another good F2P option because its substat increases the elemental mastery, and surprise surprise, Yae's passive increases her elemental skill damage output based on the elemental mastery. Hakushin Ring is also a good option because it gives the energy recharge, something that Yae lacks, and also gives you elemental damage bonus when an electro related reaction is triggered, and since Yae doesn't snapshot, even if you play Yae off field, you can still get the benefit. Also, the new weapon Oathsworn Eye is a good weapon for her because of its passive gives such a huge amount of energy recharge after casting elemental skill for 10 seconds, whereas Yae's elemental skill only has a 4 seconds cooldown. There are several options for Yae's artifacts depending on how you want to play your Yae. For an all-rounder Yae build, 2 Pitch Gladiator Oshiminawa and 2 Pitch Thundering Fury is a solid option, as it buffs all Yae's damage output regardless of it being normal attacks, charge attacks, elemental skills, or elemental bursts. If you play Yae in a mono electro team, 4 Pitch Thunder Shooter is the best option, as it increases the damage output to electro affected enemies by 35%. But if you put Yae in a team that can easily cancel out electro on the enemies, 4 Pitch Thunder Shooter might not be the best option for you. Another artifact set that I want to mention is the 4 Piece Emblem of Severed Fate. It gives Yae 20% energy recharge and also buffs her elemental burst damage output by 25% of her energy recharge. You might get lower numbers on her elemental skill if you use 4 Piece Emblem, but if you're playing Yae to quick swap her and focus more on her elemental burst, this set is a really great option for her. Typically, you want 150% energy recharge as a baseline on Yae because she needs so much energy to charge her elemental burst. For the artifact stats, you might want to give her an attack percent Sands, Electro Goblet, crit rate or crit damage circlet. Why not EM Sands, you might ask, is because the damage difference is so little compared to attack percent Sands. And EM only buffs Yae's elemental skill, whereas attack buffs her overall damage output including her elemental burst, which is her main damage output. Should you use ER Sands? I don't think so. You might argue that you want Yae to recharge her energy faster so that she can cast her elemental burst faster, but don't forget that her elemental skill also deals a huge damage, so getting attack percent Sands is overall better for both her elemental skill and elemental burst damage output. Here are some of the few suggestions that I have for Yae's team. The first one being Mono Electro, where you have Yae, Raiden, Sarah, and Sucrose. Raiden acts as a DPS/battery, Sarah boosts the overall Electro character damage output, and Sucrose with a 4-piece Iridescent to swirl Electro and reduce the enemy's Electro resistance. You can also replace Sucrose with Jin, since Jin provides healing, and she can also use 4-piece Iridescent Fenrir. The second team I want to recommend is the Yae Hyper Carry, where it consists of Yae, Raiden, Bennett, and Kazuha or Sucrose. The same as before, but this time getting the damage buff from Bennett to the active character, and Kazuha or Sucrose to shred the elemental resistance of the enemy. Some other good options is an Electro Charge Team Comp, which consists of Child or Kokomi, Fischl to act as a battery, Yae, and Bennett to provide the damage boost. You can also use some F2P options for her team such as Yae, Fischl, Xingqiu, and Bennett or Sucrose, where Fischl and Yae acts as a DPS interchangeably, Xingqiu to provide the swords and a little bit of healing, and Sucrose to shred the elemental resistance, or Bennett to buff the damage output and as a healer. Yae is a really simple character. All of her kits are damage dealing capabilities, and because her skill does a snapshot, you can use a lot of combinations and get more fluidity when swapping, since her damage dynamically changes depending on the buff that she has. Even characters like Albedo can also buff Yae's damage by giving her the elemental mastery buff that she can definitely benefit from. Also, because she can deal damage even without being on the field, it gives Yae a lot of possibilities to be paired up with another character that requires an electro applicator, or she can also act as an off-field sub DPS. Should you pull for her? It depends on your team. Because she has an energy issue, she typically needs to be paired up with another electro character like Fischl or Raiden to generate particles for her. That's it for today. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Also, you can leave a comment in the comment section below if there's anything you want to say, as I read most of my comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.
律流呪言全力攻来光意図美しきかなや聖なる来光無我の境地律流呪言律流みんなは俺が回す姿よチョック稲光すなわち永遠なり呪言律流チョックみんながそばに浄土を開放振動の権限律流チョック律流